You know the story of the asteroid. 66 million years ago, a rock from space, roughly the width of Mount Everest is tall, struck the Gulf of Mexico at 70,000 kilometers per hour. The shockwave alone was enough to level forests across an entire continent. The fires that followed blotted out the sun for years. 3/4 of all species vanished, including every non-avian dinosaur on Earth. It is the most famous extinction in history. It was not the worst, not even the second worst. 252 million years ago, something happened that makes the asteroid look like a rehearsal. An extinction so vast, so total, so prolonged that life on this planet came within a hair's breadth of ending permanently. 96% of all marine species, 70% of all land species, an estimated 83% of every genus on Earth, gone. It took 10 million years to recover, a span of time so long that it defies imagination, and yet, by geological standards, it is barely a pause. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction event. Everyone else has another name for it. To understand how catastrophic the Great Dying was, you first have to see what was lost. 260 million years ago, all of Earth's land was fused into a single supercontinent, Pangaea, a landmass stretching from pole to pole, surrounded by one vast ocean, the Pangaea. The oceans were extraordinary. Trilobites, creatures that had already survived for 270 million years, crawled across the seafloor. Coral reefs spread across the shallow continental shelves. Armored fish and early sharks patrolled the depths. It was, by any measure, a world in full bloom. On land, the dinosaurs had not yet arrived. Instead, the world belonged to the synapsids, an older lineage of reptile-like animals. Predators like the gorgonopsid with saber-shaped fangs longer than your forearm, and stocky herbivores like Lystrosaurus moving through the undergrowth in vast herds. This was a world built across hundreds of millions of years, layer up on layer of evolution, complexity stacked on complexity. And then, something began to change. It did not begin with a bang. No asteroid, no flash of light across the sky. No single moment you could point to and say, there, that is when it started. The change came slowly, the kind of slowly that no single creature could perceive. Temperatures edging upward, the air growing subtly heavier, the seasons shifting in ways that broke old rhythms. Animals that had thrived for millions of years began to sense something was wrong, not through intelligence, but through the oldest signal in biology, survival instinct. But this was not a disaster you could outrun, because it was coming from inside the planet itself. Beneath what is now Siberia, the crust of the Earth began to tear apart. What followed was not a single volcano. It was something far harder to comprehend, an entire region of the planet's skin splitting open, lava flooding outward in all directions, eruption after eruption, sustained across hundreds of thousands of years. We call it the Siberian Traps. The lava flows were so vast, they could have buried the continental United States twice under a kilometer of rock. The eruptions continued for nearly a million years without pause. But here is the thing about the Siberian Traps that makes it so much more than an eruption. The lava wasn't the weapon. The lava was the trigger. As the magma forced its way upward through the Earth's crust, it passed through something critical.
vast deposits of ancient coal and carbon-rich rock, material that had been locked underground for hundreds of millions of years. The eruptions cooked it, vaporized it, released it. Trillions of tons of carbon dioxide flooded into the atmosphere, all at once by geological standards. And that set off a chain of catastrophes, each one feeding the next. First came global warming. Temperatures across the planet surged, potentially by as much as 10 degrees Celsius on average. Near the equator, surface temperatures may have reached 60 degrees, a threshold beyond which most complex life simply cannot function. Then the oceans began to change. Carbon dioxide dissolved into seawater, turning it acidic, corrosive to the shells and skeletons that millions of species depended on for survival. As the oceans warmed, they began to stratify. Cold, oxygen-rich water stopped circulating from the depths. The seas began to suffocate from the inside. Meanwhile, above the surface, the ozone layer thinned. Ultraviolet radiation poured down onto the land, unfiltered and lethal. Any one of these disasters, the warming, the acidification, the oxygen loss, the radiation, could have triggered a mass extinction on its own. But here, they happened together. All of them, at the same time. The oceans felt it first. Reefs that had been building for hundreds of millions of years, vast underwater cities of calcium and color, began to dissolve. The acid in the water ate through the calcite skeletons that held them together. With the reefs went everything that depended on them. And with those species went the predators that fed on them. And with those predators went everything that fed on them. The collapse moved through the food web like a wave. Species that had survived for hundreds of millions of years vanished in what, geologically speaking, was an eye blink. Trilobites, animals that had outlasted 5 previous extinction events, were wiped out completely. An entire lineage, 270 million years in the making, gone forever. By the time it was over, 96% of all marine species were extinct. The ocean had become a warm, acidic, oxygen-starved grave stretching across the entire planet. On land, the story was no different. Forests that had built up over millions of years, complex ecosystems of ferns, giant trees, insects, and animals began to fail. The heat was too intense, the rains too unpredictable, the soil itself degrading as the roots that held it died. Without plants, the herbivores starved. Without herbivores, the predators followed. The great food chains of the Permian snapped, link by link. In some regions near the equator, temperatures may have reached 60 degrees Celsius during the day. That is hotter than the surface of many of Earth's deserts today. No shade, no moisture, no relief. Life fled toward the poles, where conditions were fractionally less lethal, but the poles were small, and they were already crowded. There was nowhere left to go. And then, slowly, the eruptions subsided. The skies began, almost imperceptibly, to clear. What remained was almost unrecognizable as the world that had existed before. Of all the complex ecosystems that had flourished in the Permian, the reefs, the forests, the herds, the predators, almost nothing survived. The planet's biodiversity had been reduced to something close to zero, but not quite zero. Among the survivors was an animal called Lystrosaurus, a stocky, pig-sized herbivore with a beak and 2 small tusks, unremarkable by any measure, except for one extraordinary quality. It could survive conditions that killed almost everything else. For a brief moment in Earth's history, a few million years, Lystrosaurus dominated the land, not because it was powerful, but because everything powerful was gone. At its peak, nearly 95% of all land vertebrates belonged to a single species. The most diverse world in Earth's history had been reduced almost entirely to one animal. Recovery, when it came, was painfully slow. It took 10 million years for ecosystems to regain genuine complexity. 10 million years before the reefs rebuilt, before forests matured, before food webs became intricate again. Consider, modern human beings have existed for approximately 300,000 years. The Great Dying's aftermath lasted 30 times longer than our species has walked the Earth. But the extinction had done something else, something no one alive at the time could possibly have understood. It had cleared the board. The dominant animals of the Permian were gone. The ecological roles they once filled, apex predators, large herbivores, the architects of entire landscapes, were now empty, unclaimed. Into those empty spaces moved a group of small reptiles called archosaurs, the ancestors of the dinosaurs. Without the Great Dying, there may have been no dinosaurs. Without the dinosaurs' extinction, there would have been no age of mammals. Without the age of mammals, there would be no you. Every lineage that leads to a human being passes through this catastrophe. You exist in part because life survived the worst crisis in the history of this planet. The story of life on Earth is not a smooth ascent. It is not a steady march toward greater complexity, greater beauty, greater intelligence. It is interrupted. It is violent. It has come close to ending more than once. And yet, something always survives. Something small, something stubborn, something that refuses against every odd to disappear. And from that survivor, everything begins again.
And from that survivor, everything began again. Not quickly, not easily, but inevitably. Life does not rush. It rebuilds, slowly, patiently, layer by layer. From silence to complexity, from emptiness to abundance. The world you know today is not the result of a perfect, unbroken journey. It is the product of survival, of collapse and recovery, of endings and beginnings. The Great Dying was not just the darkest chapter in Earth's history. It was the moment that made everything that followed possible. Every forest, every ocean, every living thing, including you. If you found this story worth telling, consider supporting the channel. These documentaries take time, research, writing, and careful creation to bring the past to life. And your support helps make more of them possible. So if you'd like to see what comes next, leave a like, share the video, and subscribe. This is Eon, and this is only the beginning.